This is Citations Needed with Nima Shirazi and Adam Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Citations Needed, a podcast on the media.
This is Citations
power,
Needed
PR,
with Nima
and the
Shirazi.
history of bullshit. Yep, that's right. You know who we are. And welcome as well to another Begathon edition of Citations Needed, our periodic virtual live show fundraiser. I am Nima Shirazi.
I'm Adam Johnson.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us as we stream live on YouTube. Of course, you can follow the show in the meantime on Twitter at Citations Pod, Facebook, Citations Needed. And if you're not already, we'd obviously really like you to become a supporter of the show through patreon.com/citations needed podcast. All your help and support through Patreon is so incredibly appreciated, as we are 100% listener funded.
And when you become a supporter, you get access to over 140 news briefs, extensive show notes of every episode, and more fun stuff like these live interviews, for example, that we do. And obviously, the help there helps keep the show sustainable and the episodes themselves free forever.
So tonight on Citations Needed, we will be talking about the phenomenon of the hashtag grindset guys on social media, the elite performers, the Sigma males, their personalities, or shall we say, influencers or thought leaders who urge people to be solipsistic, jingoistic, rise and grinders, and to get theirs now.
Yeah, we want to look at the militaristic, reactionary, soft eugenics tendencies of these figures. It's not the highest hanging fruit we've ever picked, but I'm sort of personally and fascinated by these guys. And so we do think there is a lot of ideological baggage that's kind of worth dissecting. In addition, they're also just kind of absurd and funny. But we're going to go over the kind of fitness advice, productivity worship, motivational speaking cliches that almost always revolves around the words mindset or mentality.
Indeed. Joining us on the show tonight, all the way from the wilds outside London, England, where it is very, very late at night, is our guest tonight, journalist, author, editor, co-host of the popular podcasts Trash Future and 10,000 Posts, and a media producer in his own right, Hossein Kesvani. And if that's not enough, he's also currently completing a master's degree in digital anthropology at University College London. A very, very motivated individual, the perfect guest. He will be joining us in just a bit. And we are really excited to get to that conversation. But first, let's also note part of why we're doing this kind of show tonight, our periodic Begathon. Citations Needed takes a team and a ton of work to produce the shows. Not many podcasts do the research we do at the pace we do it. And since we started this little show back in July of 2017, we've done nearly 200 episodes, over 140 news briefs. We've welcomed more than 275 guests on the show in that time. We love doing this. We are grateful for every single listener, every single download, every like, every share. Tens of thousands of you wonderful people listen to the show every week, which is amazing. Cannot thank you enough. We've had about 20 million downloads since we started 6.5 years ago.
Yeah, we've never run commercials or been sponsored by any companies. We have no advertisers. We aren't subsidized by grants, foundations, nonprofits. The way we stay completely editorial independent is that we rely on our patrons and their support for the show. And so every now and then we have to come hat in hand and prostrate ourselves and beg you, thus the name Begathon, to if you haven't contributed to the Patreon, to please do so, because it does require, like we said, quite a bit of work and a lot of hours of research, writing, and recording. So this is us begging. This is us prostrating. This is us imploring you.
That's right. Do it for the Citations Needed team.
Do it for the Citations Needed, so we don't have to sell you razors or mattresses. Which we probably wouldn't do anyway, but just so we're just trying to emotionally extort you. So hopefully it's working.
That's right. Because here's the truth. Like, even with the millions of downloads, again, incredible. Relatively few listeners actually support the show financially, and the work of the at least 7 people, give or take, on the team. And so tonight, again, we are asking if you have the means and if you're able, please do go to our Patreon page. Again, that's patreon.com/citations needed podcast and help us out.
There's
It
one
really
other
does keep it going.
there's one other manipulative tactic we want to use, which is my favorite, which is the PBS NPR flatter the listener. You like sophisticated podcasts. You're not one of those people who watches The Masked Singer or Navy NCI FBIS. You're advanced. You're better than those people. Is that working? You think that would too on
I
the
think
should I have
that's
been
working.
more
It's working
subtle?
on me.
Okay.
It's
I love when
working on
NPR
me.
does that. You watch Masterpiece Theater. It's like, do you really? But yeah, your support helps keep the show sustainable and helps keep the episodes themselves free, which has kind of always been a foundational goal of the show. So we're grateful for that.
Yeah, and if that kind of fuzzy, warm feeling of being a supporter of the show is not quite enough, we're going to sweeten the pot a little more. Before we bring in our guest and get down to the grind, let's just explain how our begathons work. What this means with our giveaways is that, yes, we are asking you, dear, wonderful, amazing, genius level, very sophisticated, very attractive listener, to please financially support the show. But we also are giving away Citations Needed swag along the way. During the show, we'll give out some t-shirts as we go. So just very, very quickly, let me just note that for our first time, like new signups through Patreon, or anyone who changes their tier, who kind of like, levels up in their tier of support, they will be eligible. You will be eligible to be in the running to get some Citations Needed t-shirts during the show. So we'll do this kind of every, let's say, 15 minutes tonight to folks who are joining us and who sign up anew. So definitely listen closely for when those pop up. And so let's actually start with the giveaway. For all of you live streaming this on YouTube right now, go over to patreon.com/citations needed podcast if you are not already a supporter, or if you are a supporter and want to raise the tier and sign up to support the show, move up a tier in the next 15 minutes or so, and drop a comment in the YouTube chat after you do it to let us know that you've done that. One of you very generous listeners will be selected at random to receive a Citations Needed t-shirt in the color of your choosing. Sorry, we don't have free merch for literally every single person listening tonight, but don't worry, we'll keep doing this kind of thing throughout the show, and we do this throughout the year. And if you're just dying for that sweet citation swag, just head over to our merch store at any point at bonfire.com. Search for Citations Needed. You'll find all sorts of goodies there, and you can pick up whatever you need. So let us get down to it. Adam, I think we should start the show.
Yeah, so tonight we'll be focusing on a very specific type of public figure, one that espouses rugged individualism propelled by fitness, salesmanship, and quasi-fascist principles. It exists on a spectrum, which we'll discuss in this show, but basically that you are the protagonist of your reality, and your Ubermensch, or your kind of great man journey, is what's central to your identity, and overcoming obstacles, et cetera, et cetera. And generally, it's a subgenre called grindset influencer. So on this show, we're going to look at 3 examples. It's a little bit arbitrary. It's a very flooded space. We chose these guys because they're kind of our personal favorites, because they're the most kind of ridiculous, and also they're popular. David Goggins, Andy Elliott, and Ed Mylett. They have nothing really new to offer, but like any proper salesman, they're very good at kind of finding an angle, finding a niche, to motivate you to get off your ass and go out there and conquer the world. The hustle subculture has that these 3 personify has kind of dwindled, and it's kind of evolved recently, which we'll discuss with our guests. It's been criticized everywhere from the BBC to the New York Times. So this is not the most sort of unique criticism, but we do think that its popularity on social media, especially as it's kind of pivoted, which we'll discuss, to more to lower socioeconomic ladders, kind of invites its own problems for obvious reasons. And so these guys are kind of the three most popular social media. Again, there's going to be ones we omit. We can't cover them all. I'm sure anyone who spent more than
drop them in the chat, but don't link to them because
anyone
no
who spent anyone, well, if it's really funny, link to it. Anyone who spent more than 5 minutes on social media, whether TikTok, YouTube, whatever, has seen these guys. So if you have your favorite, sure, let us know. And by favorite, I mean the worst.
Yeah, exactly.
Let us know.
So let's talk about where this kind of grind set even came from. The rise and grind culture, as we know it, is, fairly young. The use of terms like rise and grind and hustle culture, effectively synonyms, has proliferated since the start of the millennium. Some sources attribute the development of this subculture, for lack of a better term, to the move fast, get some value systems of the American tech and fitness worlds. Author Nick Cernicek also has explained that the phenomenon is really a product of the nature of white-collar desk work, internalized competitiveness, and the pursuit of fulfillment in a society where fulfillment is often hard to find. As Cernicek told our own guest, who is about to join us, Hossein Kesvani, back in 2018, this, quote, what you find is that like fitness people who want to show and talk about their gains and what they've been working on, you'll have guys who want to show off their life hacking. You'll have people who want to talk about how they wake up early in the morning to start work, or how they stayed in the office all night working. It's almost as if they value themselves based on this performance, which makes sense because if you think about it, in an industrial economy where people made things, they could say that they went to work and did something. Whereas in an office environment and in a service-driven economy, that's harder to determine. So some people end up thinking they have to do particular things that their colleagues don't to justify why they haven't wasted their day, end quote. So, and with that, we will welcome our guest, journalist, author, editor, podcaster, media producer, Hossein Kesvani, to the show. Hossein, please do join us. Welcome to Citations Needed. We so appreciate you staying up late with us, Hossein. Welcome.
Thank you. No, I'm very glad that I could also rise and grind to do this podcast, which is one of the things that you're supposed to do if you are like hustling and making cash and so I'm glad that I can sort of live this philosophy.
That's right.
Exactly. That we're going to talk about today or tonight.
So to start, I'd love if you as a very kind of deft analyst, observer, and also commentator on these kinds of subcultures. I'd love it if you could kind of introduce our viewers tonight and listeners to the show to this Sigma grind set mentality and kind of what that means. And this like convergence of the nihilist incel manosphere, hustle and grind culture motivation, and fitness influencer content, how that all kind of comes together to make the Sigma grind set.
But yeah, thanks for having me. So like, I sort of want to clarify by saying that like, I've been like less sort of, but when you asked me to come on, it was like one of the first times in a while that I'd sort of like dipped my toes back into that space. But I think back in 2018 and like round about that period, I was working for a men's magazine, which I think is where you may have read Nick's quote from, if I'm correct. And so the sort of questions about like masculinity, what that was, how that was expressed online was very much like a beat that me and a few of my colleagues were sort of always sort of fixated on. And at the time I must have been like 26 or 27 at that time. And it was a really interesting period because I think I'm very much not the target demographic of a lot of this content now. And we might get some time to speak about that in a second. But back then I was very much like that. I was a young man who like lived in this, like had a white collar job. And also was just trying to figure out like, what am I doing with my life? Especially I'm like a bachelor at that time. I'm not sort of, I like lots of young men, I have lots of these questions, and I also spend a lot of time on the internet, both for my job and for my life. And so these videos were sort of just like, and at the time it was mostly like YouTube and Twitter and everything, but all this content just seemed to sort of be throwing itself at me. And so I became really interested in it, especially as I saw other people becoming like more influenced by that type of stuff. To answer like your question about what the Sigma grind set is, so the Sigma grind set is really, I mean, it is a meme for the most part. Like it's not something that these guys like take like, but they don't take that term sort of seriously because it is like a bit it is there to sort of deride them, but the sort of underlining basis of it is that these are guys who believe, or like their sort of missions are to sort of self-optimize to in various forms, right? So like in most cases it's self-optimization through fitness, and that isn't just like sort of going to the gym and everything. It's sort of like it's very much about like the sort of dozens of supplements that they take and so on, and like again that's like a very complicated, very fluid area. Sometimes, you know, a lot of it is sort of linked to business and the idea that like, you know, you hustle and grind, and if you're able to sort of do that, and that sort of, you know, that can sort of vary from waking up at like 4 or 5 a.m. to like go do a 3 mile run, and then you know, and do emails and also listen to a podcast at like 3 times speed while you're doing all of that. That's like real Sigma grindset shit. But like, you know, on the sort of incremental level, it is very much about like over optimization, over productivity. And you know, back in 2018, a lot of that, as you mentioned, and the quote that you actually gave was really interesting, because like I think a lot of these guys now, they wouldn't necessarily frame being Sigma as like sort of linked to or rooted in an office job. So it was interesting that back then, like so much of it was just like, well, how do you perform, you know, yeah, how do you perform like, you know, productivity, and how do you perform your sort of best optimized self within like, you know, this sort of high-end city job. Whereas now I think a lot of the sort of like mindset stuff is actually about like getting away from the office, right? It's very much just like, you know, what if you were at home and you had like 7 screens rather than like the 2 screens you have at work, but you're still like overworking, and you're still like over optimizing. I think COVID did quite a lot in terms of sort of like shifting some of that and also sort of accelerating some of its worst excesses. All of which is to say that I think that like the time when I was much more plugged into this space and what like that type of you know, sort of optimized grindset influencer is now, it's not to say that it's different, but it's evolved in this very strange way, and part of that is like sort of a reaction to sort of the political moments and the political events between 2018 or like between 2016 to the present. But also like on a bigger level, it is also like the sort of grindset guys now are almost a reaction to the failure of the grindset guys back in 2016.
Oh,
Well,
that's
it's like any drug; it has to get more hardcore and more sort of targeted. Because you said there's so many different kind of ideological and philosophical currents here. We're kind of lumping them all into one by necessity. But so let's narrow it down a little bit here. Let's use some examples here. So we're going to start with David.
So we're so Adam, before we get into these into the 3 personalities, I want to get us really pumped and get all of our viewers really fucking excited about this shit. Okay. So let's kick it off with a clip by one of these wonderful grindset influencers, Jocko Willink.
Quit waiting for the perfect time. Quit waiting for the perfect situation to occur. It's not going to happen. You want to know when the time is right? The time is right now. So what are you doing with your time? Are you doing something productive? Are you moving towards a goal? Making yourself better? Or are you letting time slip by? Wasting. Stop wasting time. Get after it.
The perfect
do
intro.
not listen to Citations Needed. That's a complete waste of time. Yeah, so that's a sort of good intro. I want to start by talking about I feel very motivated. By talking about David Goggins, who's very popular. He was on the Joe Rogan show a bunch. He's on Fox News now and then. His claim to fame is he lost 100 pounds before joining the Navy SEALs, I believe. He's the only person in history to complete the training of the Navy SEALs, Army Ranger, and Air Force tactical air controller, which I guess makes him kind of a MacGruber, you know, 47 tours in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Somalia, Afghanistan. He would have a good resume scene. Goggins has leveraged his story into kind of what he calls a warrior mentality or warrior mindset. Where he has a lot of popular videos on TikTok and YouTube where he's running. He's an ultra marathoner, so he does these 150 mile runs. And he talks to the camera in a sort of very aggressive way. He likes to swear a lot. He's not sort of family friendly, and his whole thing is like a lot of these guys, which is a current we can get into later. He's obsessed with this idea of haters. So there's some mysterious cohort or confederation of haters who presumably stalk him. I don't know if it's his wife's divorce lawyer, or if it's what the sort of forces working, FBI. I don't know who's sort of stalking him that are his haters. Presumably it's the comments on YouTube. I don't know. So let's watch a clip from David Goggins talking about how you need to get off your proverbial ass. We're working on that clip. Give us 1 second here.
It's
sorry. All right, here we go. Get ready to be Goggins.
What the hell were you all waiting for to start attacking life? Waiting for the fucking stars to align? Back when I was growing up, the song came out. All I need is a miracle. Well, guess what? That miracle ain't coming. There is no perfect time to start. You gotta start now with changing your life. We're all being tested in life. And guess what? This is one test you can't cheat on. We all have our own test. Some of us are obese. Some of us are depressed. Some of us are insecure. In the military, we had a big old rucksack on the back. Had batteries, water, extra gear. Your extra gear is the shit you're dealing with in life. And the only way to overcome it is for you and you alone to face it. You gotta do your best work when you're the least motivated. So those days you don't want to do it, guess what you gotta do? You gotta suck it the fuck up and do it. Stay hard.
So his tagline is "Stay hard." So,
I love that one. I also like how he uses like the baggage metaphor from like George Clooney's Up in the Air, like TED Talk.
Yeah, no, it's been done before,
which is really fantastic. So yeah, there's this common refrain from Goggins and others like him that you should never blame other people, right, for any failures or shortcomings, anything in your life really that is like a barrier to ultimate success. You have only yourself to blame, right? It's a pretty convenient, pithy motivational snippet that reflects kind of a right-wing ethos designed to divert people away from thinking about systems or communities or and of collective responsibility in favor of total self-reliance and rugged individualism. Hossein, what is like as you kind of are watching the clips we're playing, but also in your own observation of this, kind of what do you see as the kind of danger of the motivation to kind of right-wing fascist pipeline?
Can I like do a little segue just for a second?
Oh my God,
because there are two things, right? First of all, I wanted to find out this song that he's referencing.
All I need is a miracle.
Mike and the Mechanics, right? I was like, the song, it sounds familiar, but I just thought it was really funny because it made me remember the second David Goggins fact that I know and lives rent free in my head, which is that he doesn't listen to music. Like at all, like he doesn't engage with pop culture at all. And he went on like Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan was sort of like, hey, like, do you listen to music when you work out? And he goes in his very intense way, like, no, I don't. But then the thing that he says afterwards is the thing that floors me every time. So he asks, so Joe Rogan asks, like, okay, so you have headphones on, what do you listen to? And David Goggins says, I record all the people who like are haters and say like bad things about me, and I just play them on a loop. He listened, and that is like genuinely one of the most insane things I've heard. And I don't think it's fake. I think he does it. And like there is like with the David Goggins thing. I'm sorry, like I will get to your question. I will get to your question in a second, but I think it's a really interesting insight into the David Goggins thing because like I read like little segments of his book today, not enough to like really sort of like make a comment or a judgment on it. And just like watched a couple of his clips, but to me, what seems like really evident, and like it's a really like, again, I don't want to like psychoanalyze in like in any official way, but it does just seem like this is a guy who is just so deeply insecure. And it's like one of those tendencies of people who like kind of were underdogs when they were younger and they finally sort of got the success and recognition, but they don't really know how to survive without like the adversity that they sort of believe they grew up with, right? And I'm not like I don't doubt that David Goggins has probably like went through like shit when he was younger, especially like regarding his weight and like the racial element and everything. Like I don't I don't discount for a second all those things. What is interesting is just the idea that he can't really, like, for a guy who's sort of like, you know, ignore the haters, just focus on your goals and everything. Like, he needs his haters, and he needs like this deep insecurity of himself to actually function as a person. Like, to the point where like he can't even listen to like a couple of nice like bits of pop music like while he does his runs. That feels like really strange and also quite sad and melancholy, right?
Yeah, there's a reoccurring theme about haters, which I do want to talk about because I'm sort of fascinated by this idea that haters are this kind of morally agnostic thing. It's like, well, some haters you should probably listen to because they may have merit, and other haters are probably just racist bullies or assholes or whatever. There's not some idea that you need to like sort through the haters and sort of figure out and do some self-analysis. It's just haters.
But I think it touches on But I think it touches on the thing that you were saying about like the sort of disregard of community and disregard of like systems, and just like what you like, also the recognition that you sort of do exist in a society, and in that you do like have responsibilities and duties, and like, you know, a sort of like you do have to participate in society whether you like it or not. And it seems like the sort of haters argument is a really convenient way of just sort of kind of removing yourself from that, like cognitively, and to sort of like believe that, you know, you are morally a better, more elevated person because you are choosing not to engage with society like as a whole, and you're sort of placed within that, and you don't want to recognize your place within that. And so you can simply dismiss all these people as just being like, oh yeah, they just want to like keep me down, they want to like stop me from running like 10 miles a day or something like that, right? It's like, and again, it's like, as the point that you make, no one is stopping you from doing that. Like, you can go outside and do that. I can go outside and do that right now if I want to.
Right, but you don't have to yell at me while you're doing
it. You know, but I'm not going to listen to like people like kind of saying shit about me. You know, on because I think that would like, you know, I don't think that would be a very nice run. But what can I say? But to like touch on your bigger question about the pipeline, I do think that a lot of it is rooted. And again, like I knew this. It feels different with the Rise and Grind guys right now, but in terms of the sort of like right-wing politics pipeline, you know, obviously the sort of like individualism element was very much there when I was first looking at these guys, right? And this was like just like in the sort of 2016 era, like in the run up to the 2016 election, and then also sort of in the aftermath of that. Like the sort of like right-wing kind of individualistic narrative seemed to be a lot more present, right? And just sort of this whole idea that, you know, the state shouldn't sort of provide anything. A lot of the sort of like Trump narratives were around the idea of like, you know, defunding, you know, before like woke became like, you know, a sort of commonplace in the lexicon, the idea that like, you know, there was sort of like institutional rot and like, you know, traces and stuff, like haters in the government and everything, right? To really just to sort of extend it to that point. And so the only person that you can really trust is yourself. You know, a lot of this was like extension of like, you know, because this is also the period when like Jordan Peterson, for example, becomes really famous, and, you know, his sort of refrain or his sort of like thing about, you know, make your bed, like, and his whole sort of broader politics around, you know, ignore every, like, you can't change anything systemically. You can't, like, so you shouldn't participate in politics, and ergo you shouldn't participate in broader society at all. You should just sort of focus on yourself and your immediate family, like very sort of like old school Thatcherism.
Yeah, it's the same. I'm sorry, go ahead. I apologize.
Well, I mean, all I was going to say is now I think it's sort of like it's still there, but it takes a very different flavor. And I wonder whether part of it is because like the post sort of COVID or like the post 2020 election and also sort of COVID really sort of did a number on the idea of how far individualism just on its own can really take you. And so for a lot of these sort of like rise and grind guys, I think, you know, and especially where they're sort of turning or they're sort of becoming a lot more invested in politics in a way that they were at least performatively weren't doing in 2016. A lot of that comes from this recognition that like, oh, like actually I can sort of be a rugged individualist and I'm still like having a really shitty time about it. And so my haters are now like much broader. And so you have to engage with politics, because how else are you going to find your next set of haters that aren't like, you know, your family and or like former friends who like left you because you're being weird.
Right. So let's go to another clip here. This is also got Goggins. Let's do clip 2 where he's in the rain. And
I think it's clip number 1, actually.
Sorry, clip number 1.
The
rather. Sorry. The rain is both a thing you run in and also a metaphor.
It's 44 degrees and it's nice and rainy outside. But no one cares about that. It's not about the rain. It's what the rain represents. Life is always giving you a test, trying to give you a way out, trying to give you an excuse not to show up.
So yeah, Goggins. Let's watch clip 2 as well. Let's just watch them back to back here, so we're not taking up too much time here. This is our last Goggins clip.
The second you look at your phone, the second you turn the TV on, you're in a battle. I want to win the war in the morning. If you do something you don't want to do every morning, you're already giving yourself the proper self-talk to attack the people that don't like you, to attack your insecurities, to attack what the world's going to give you. I once had that mentality that no one understands what the I'm going through. And if you keep that mentality, you're going to stay in the same exact spot that you're in.
So I want to talk a bit about this idea of the sort of sociological reason why this stuff's popular. Because a lot of, I mean, we mock it, but these videos do rack up millions and millions of views. Like, so typically in the show, we go after like large corporate media. We actually don't really do social media, but I thought this one's worth doing, A, because I found it kind of funny, but B, because it is a ton of views.
When we say that they're like influencers, it's because they reach a lot of people.
They reach a lot more than like the New York Times editorial board, unfortunately. And so, but I want to talk about, so clearly there's some organic market, right? This is not something that's being sort of manufactured by Rupert Murdoch or whatever. There's an organic market there. And I want to talk about what you feel like is the kind of, because a lot of it overlaps with sales and people with very precarious jobs, a lot of gig jobs, right? This idea you're going to wake up at 5 a.m. and go drive Uber for 6 hours. And so it's not just your kind of upwardly mobile types. And I think in many ways it's really not, actually. Like you said, I think it kind of migrated from the Silicon Valley budding millionaire, budding billionaire mentality into a kind of subprime grifter pitch for people that basically really do have to wake up every day at 6 a.m. and go work, again, cutting meat at some restaurant, or they have a job that's drudgery.
Well, it's kind of like Glenn Ross, like your way into feeling motivated about your actual work, like work, like real work.
And so I want to talk, not to get too sort of Marxist here, but I do want to talk about the alienation of labor and how like these things do I do think rise in correlation with precarious labor. Typically in the sales world, there's a lot of sales sort of stuff. We'll talk about that when we get to Andy Elliott, but I want you to talk about that.
Oh, wait, am I supposed to come in? Sorry, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if you were asking a question. I'm very sorry about that. Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. So one thing I actually just remembered was that I actually spent a lot of my life rising and grinding, in the sense that like my parents ran a store, like a sort of like grocery store, when I was younger. And like obviously like every immigrant family business, like, I had to work there. And we used to open that store at 6 a.m., which meant that I had to get up at 5 a.m. For pretty much all my teenage years. So I've been rising and grinding longer than so many of these guys. I just wanted to like put that out there. And I did not get any benefits from that at all. None of, like, I feel like I had the right to make these videos, and yet I don't see any of the benefits that David Goggins talking about. But no, I think on a serious point, you are right. I think to the extent that like, yeah, it's sort of like this example sort of been used quite a lot, especially with especially like when critiquing these guys. I think one of my colleagues wrote a really interesting piece in Mel magazine, the magazine that I used to work for, where like she pointed out that like actually the people who've been rising and grinding and doing the sort of like degrees of like and the people who will always be a way more optimized than any of these sort of like business bros are like, immigrants, like mostly immigrants who do multiple gig economy jobs, or immigrant mothers in particular who like look after kids and look after like multi-generational families and have jobs as well, right? And like none of them like have the time to like make a David Goggins style or like Jocko Willink style like highly edited video where they have like the epic music playing in the background. Like for so much of your actual precarious labor that drives a lot of like Western economies, like especially like here in Britain in particular, like as well, these people are not sort of seen as like the bastions of hard work, or even sort of like the sort of the uses examples of why capitalism as a system is superior to any other system. Like these are people that are kind of considered to be either like parasitic to the economy by like right-wing governments and right-wing media, or like at the very best are sort of like relegated to like the invisible, the shadow economy, right? And so the people that are left who are kind of then kind of the vanguards of the virtues of hard work are like these weird sales guys who are sort of mostly self-employed, and also for the most part you don't really know what they're doing or like what they're trying to sell. And I've always just sort of found that really amusing with a lot of the sales guys, where they put out so much content which is like day in the life type of stuff, where they sort of show that they do cold plunges at like 5 a.m. and sort of do all the runs and everything, and then they have this section in the videos often where it's like, now I sit down at my office and do some work, and they never tell you what they do or like what they're doing or what they're selling, and you really have to like go through quite a lot of websites to like actually figure out that, oh, what this person is doing is like kind of software as a service, but not really. It's sort of like a drop shipping thing as well.
Yeah, it's
and
there's
shady,
yeah.
And there's like a course attached to it, and like in order to find out more you have to sign up to that course and everything, and so it's sort of like selling. I don't even know whether like lifestyle is necessarily the right word, but it's sort of selling like abstractions, I guess.
Well, it's a lot of multi-level marketing. I mean, a lot of this stuff is
all
they all have, like Andy Elliott especially, they have multi-level marketing, or kind of Trump University type stuff where it's like be a winner like me. And so in many ways you're kind of selling that you're a salesman. It's sort of like kind of the George Hamilton famous for being famous, right? Where like, in the 1920s they would put a little baseball card in a pack of gum to sell the gum, and then they would remove more of the gum, and then eventually you just have baseball cards without the gum, and then they just got rid of the gum and there's baseball cards, right? It's sort of traditional kind of Marshall McLuhan, like you're selling that you're a winner. It doesn't even actually matter if you are, because kind of like how, again, a lot of rock stars are selling an image, or rappers are like selling an image, and then they get rich and famous, but then that kind of becomes self-perpetuating. So a lot of these guys, like you said, you have absolutely zero idea what the original thing they were doing was before they became social media influencers.
Well, I think the interesting thing now is also like that's sort of where they begin. So I think like with the old version of the Rise and Grind influencers, a lot of it was like, okay, you work in an office, right? Or you sort of like, you're self-employed, but you sort of work in an office and you sort of do like marketing. Like, I get it. I sort of get it. But with like a lot of with the new type of Rise and Grind guys, especially like those who sort of kind of came up during COVID or like during the lockdowns, where they were sort of like sharking NFTs and sort of weird crypto altcoins and stuff, and doing drop shipping and everything as well. It was very much just like, I don't like, it starts off at this weird point of abstraction. And this is sort of where I don't know whether it touches on what your point was about, like, or like the point at the beginning about, as sort of labor becomes more alienated, the sort of idea of having to sort of differentiate, the idea of having to individuate, the pressure of that becomes higher. And so where I was initially sort of writing and studying it, from the context of like people in white collar office jobs desperately trying to differentiate themselves in environments where it was increasingly difficult to do so, the sort of new versions now sort of feel like the pressures are even heavier, and it also is much more like aestheticized as well. So it's like the importance is much more about showing that you're successful. And I think these are why these videos sort of do quite well, or like they seemingly are quite popular, because the thing I wanted to sort of point out, and every time I talk about this, it's like, yeah, a lot of these videos are stupid and a lot of these videos are sort of like manipulative and everything, but like the reason people search them out, I think, is like a very real thing that shouldn't necessarily be wholly dismissed, right? Which is that, like, there are lots of people, and I don't just mean like young men and stuff. I think just like young people, middle-aged, like, old middling millennials and stuff, who like are very much like, fuck, what do we do? Like, what is sort of where you're sort of like lacking, I sort of say like, it's like the sort of like monikers of sort of like transitioning into different stages of your life, be it like in terms of home ownership, or like the ability to like raise a family, or even just the ability to like look after your parents, for example, or something along those lines. The fact that like almost every facet of that progress is now become increasingly expensive, if not sort of impossible to attain in many places, kind of means that like, there is this sort of sense of, well, what are the sort of measurements of progress, and what are the measurements of, how does someone like, as an alienated young person, not even in a city, but even like in a small town or something like that, how do they sort of know that like, they're doing okay, right?
Yeah.
And so these guys then sort of come up, and like, they're not sort of saying to these young people that, oh yeah, you're doing all right. Like, bearing in mind the current situation of things, like, you're sort of doing okay, and don't put too much pressure on yourself. These guys are like, no, you're doing shit, you're doing awful, you're doing like, you suck. Like, I don't care if you have like a high paid job and like, you can sort of look after yourself and everything. You're doing like shit, and that's because you don't go running at 5 a.m. in the rain and like, listen to your podcast at 4 times speed, right?
No, exactly right. That it's like, yeah, your own antidote to
Yeah.
precarity is to like perform.
Yeah, and I mean, because it just touches on this sense of like, well, even if you're sort of like on the higher end of like things, even if you have like, your job and you have like, and you're able to sort of pay your rent and everything, like, that doesn't mean like, in a lot of cases, that doesn't actually like mean you'll be happy at all. And so like, it does really prey on this sort of sense of insecurity and unhappiness. And this promise that like, oh, if you like the only option you have is to optimize yourself. Yeah. When, it's the only answer that I guess I can really give, because again, like even to sort of like have the very bare minimal comforts of life at the moment, that does quite often require you to sort of move away from the societies and communities and move to places where fostering societies and communities of that sort of work on like reciprocity like become less accessible, if not impossible to attain.
Well, before we move on to our next grind setter, let me announce 2 winners, new patrons of the show, supporters of the show. Cannot thank you enough. Winners of our first t-shirt giveaway, and then we'll do some more. But the 2 winners are Carly Martin and Gwendolyn S. Congratulations. Thank you again. That's Carly Martin and Gwendolyn S. We will be emailing you directly about your prizes, about what kind of t-shirts you want, what colors you want. So stay tuned for those. Look out in your email and also on Patreon for those messages. But cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much. And also, starting right now, we will do our next giveaway. So please, folks who have been signing up, please continue to do so. You are now all eligible for the next t-shirt giveaway. But with that, Adam, move us on to
let's go to grind setter number 2.
Let's go to grind setter number 2.
Andy Elliott, who like Goggins has a kind of military theme. His fans are called the Elliott Army, which refers to his sales and fitness clients. So we're going to watch a clip where he stands at a whiteboard and talks about maximizing your potential and total recreation. So let's watch that clip. We have a good Glengarry AIDA whiteboard situation here. So let's watch that.
Most of you guys, the reason why you're not getting what you want is because, dude, you got a minimum wage mindset here. You don't have a 9-figure mindset. You're freaking broken. Instead of breaking records, you break mentally every time there's a problem. I love to.
All right. So if I can have a 9-figure mindset, why not have a 50-figure mindset? Let's go.
I love it. There's actually the next clip. Let's do that right away, just to really maximize the Andy Elliott here.
Yeah.
Right now, I want you to shoot me that text, that 918-210-0254. I want you to join Elliott Army with me. And by the way, listen to me. If you're uncommitted and you won't make the decision, don't even send the text. But if you will, and you'll do the work, and you'll grind, and you want to change your life, I'll tell you exactly what to do. It won't cost you nothing. I'll tell you exactly what to do. And all you'll have to do is hold that commitment to yourself. And if you do, I guarantee you 90 days from now, you'll look up and the person that you see in that mirror undeniably blow you away. By the way, there's different levels.
Different levels, okay. So we have a kind of sign up to my newsletter, and
if you stack for levels, it sort of makes this kind of very strange triangular shape.
Exactly. There's isosceles-esque multi-level marketing. See, this is actually the opposite of what Citations Needed does. We actually make people miserable and stay in bed all day. This is any Mylett deal specifically, and I think it's more sales oriented. A lot of people who do smiling and dialing and cold calling and all that kind of miserable stuff. If you've ever had one that has ever had to do that, it's not fun. And so his focus is very much on kind of concrete results. Has a again, like a lot of these things, has an MLM or kind of Trump University type dynamic. So let's talk a bit about sales, because I think there's actually or marketing. There's a lot of sales and marketing overlap here. If one goes through the sort of fans of a lot of these people, especially Mylett and Andy Elliott, kind of maybe less on the fitness side and more on the sales side. Talk, if you could, Hussein, about like I don't know if you've ever done sales personally, or if you know anyone who has, or has been involved in the kind of humiliation involved in sales. It's an extremely hard job. My father was a salesman for 40 years, and you know, he came to him naturally. I tried to do it a couple times, and when I was in high school and college, and I was horrible at it. When I was 14, I got a job selling newspapers door to door. I sold zero. And I had a friend. I had a friend I worked with.
You were probably just criticizing the headlines, though.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's where my hatred of media is, my sort of Joker origin story. But I had a friend who was just Ricky Roma. I mean, he made like thousands of dollars at the age of 14. Talk a bit about the sort of overlap with the rise and grind culture and the kind of increasing sales and marketing industries in your mind.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like a very American phenomenon. It's not to sort of say that doesn't exist in like Europe and the US, but I think Europe and the UK, I think in the UK, like looking at some of the sort of British and the British rise and grind guys, they sort of copy American methods and like sales techniques and stuff, which I think is like a really interesting observation. So a lot of this sort of comes from just like an outsider's observation of what that type of sales culture is like. And my thinking is like, well, I imagine there's sort of crossover in terms of how you sell, you know, because I think, you know, on the very basic level, I haven't had like sales experience, but I did like work in my parents' store for most of my life, which involves selling things and like trying to get people to buy like, you know, name brand cereal over like, you know, the sort of cheaper brands and stuff, right? And so, and I was also not very good at it. I wasn't like a particularly confident person. I also like am a very bad liar. Like I sort of like, you know, so when I would try to lie, I would just give the game away immediately. And I think you need to sort of know how to sort of be a particular kind of character. And so I think when it comes to sort of like self-improvement spaces, like sales techniques is sort of the sort of foundation of doing that. Because I think if you're selling a product or selling anything or trying to upsell someone, what you are trying to do is like convince them that, or if you like follow you're first of all like finding people's like insecurities, right? And like the whole job is sort of exploit that in some way. That's just like the way that the game works. And then the second element of it is like, well, if you go with like this product, it will change your life, right? And so you're sort of overselling just by nature, because what you are trying to do is tell people that like this sort of sense of deep unhappiness you have right now, you know, can entirely be changed if you just spend some money to go do it, right? And I think that like that seems to sort of be the foundation for a lot of the sort of like sales strategies. And then like the social media element, I think that like, you know, online like platforms and stuff like really provide the incentives or like provide the structures in which like you can then build that out into like, you know, like flow systems. I don't know what the sort of technical term is, but a lot of these sort of rise and grind guys, they'll sort of like put out content for free, as you know, and then like, you know, you'll sort of have your subscription tiers, and like a lot of those tiers, you know, since the sort of like since Andrew Tate sort of showed up on the scene, a lot of those tiers have kind of been like various sort of copycats of his version of the War Room or like Hustlers University. Like the sort of university college like things seem to be quite popular, and I think that's a really interesting contemporary phenomenon.
You just call everything a boot camp now.
Well, this is the interesting part, because it used to sort of be like, I think as you mentioned, a lot of these things used to be very military, right? Or like militarily inspired. So you'd have like your boot camp, so you'd have your you know, your sort of like your subscribers would be your armies and so on.
The Elliott
in more
army,
recent,
every morning is a battle, right?
Exactly. In more recent years, I've sort of noticed that like the university model has kind of become like taken a more popular approach, whether it's like the University of Austin, like that weird Barry Weiss University, which I'm not sure exists anymore. But also I think in the UK, there's an influencer whose name I won't mention just because I'm still sort of looking into him. But he like was a sort of like religious influencer who over COVID got divorced and decided to go become a crypto guy. Claims he made like a bunch of money sort of like selling cryptocurrency at like the right time, and now he sort of set up his own university where he basically like goes to like event halls in East London, where his sort of like paying customers are sort of, you know, teenagers mostly, like, or like kids in their early 20s and stuff, and teaches them. And I looked at like one of the sort of itineraries of these university courses, like the sales courses, and the they don't really teach you anything about, like, bearing in mind that this is supposed to be about finance and trading. There is only one class in that sort of like 9-class like session that is actually about finance. The rest of it is about there was like one called mindset. There was one that was called that was one just like fully about like diet, nutrition, and going to the gym, which I thought was a bit weird. A lot of like, so much of this like is marketed around this idea that, you know, you sort of have to improve yourself holistically. And I think like approaching it that way kind of gives a lot of these people like various avenues in which they can exploit people, because the narrative is ultimately like, if you're poor, if you're like, I don't want to say if you're poor, but it's more like, if you don't have enough money, or if you don't have the money that you want, if you don't have the job you want, if you're sort of struggling to make ends meet, if you're on minimum wage, then that's not like a problem to do with like your relationship to like the society or the economy that you live in. It's not a relationship to the material world that you have. It's a sort of personal failing. And so the only way to improve is by like, or the only way to sort of get out of that conundrum is to holistically change yourself in every possible way. And I'm the only, and like, that's a big thing to ask of anyone, right? Like a very big, intimidating thing to ask of anyone, especially people who are very, very desperate. So the idea of someone being like, someone with like, you know, who's very slick and very, you know, like charismatic, to say that, look, no one in your society is going to help you do this, but I alone will help you do that. I think that's like a very powerful message for people who like are just kind of really down on their luck.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, in that first Andy Elliott clip that we played, you know, he uses the term minimum wage mindset. I mean, it is like, it is right out there, right? That it's not only kind of preying on people who are struggling. I mean, to like make a living, to get by, or with mental health, or with like all this stuff. Like, it's just wrapped up. But then the kind of you know, there's an easy fix, even though like the fix isn't easy because you have to like grind, right? But it's still like a get ripped quick, get rich quick thing. Which just speaks to this kind of salesman mentality. Speaking of sales, I will say this is a begathon. So thank you everyone for we did this on purpose. Thank you for grind setting with us and for continuing to support the show. We cannot thank you enough. I do want to just, before we get to the next little bit, Adam, announce our 2 next winners of t-shirts. So thank you, everyone who's been signing up and supporting the show. It really does help. It really does keep us going because we are 100% listener funded. So thank you. And our 2 winners are Darren and Jackson Cross, which is a fantastic name for this episode. Jackson Cross and Darren, thank you so much for your support. You have now won Citations Needed swag. We will email you and get at you through Patreon message as well. So look out for that and let us know what we can send your way. So look out for that email from the Citations Needed team. And thank you so much. But Adam, take us to the next piece.
Yeah, well, so this is our third and final grind set influencer who had a viral clip that was sort of mocked. Ed Mylett, he's probably the most popular, kind of mainstream, does some mainstream media, sells a lot of books. And he's kind of right-wing adjacent. He does like a lot of seminars and getaway stuff with some conservative influencers. But he's been pushing this idea again, as part of like a sales maximizing productivity thing.
This is my favorite one.
Let's just watch the clip. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. I think it may have been what prompted us to even do to do this episode. But let's watch this right now.
TikTok, right?
My day is 6 a.m. to noon, and I'm not crazy. You're crazy for thinking it takes 24 hours, just like some dude in a cave did 300 years ago. My second day starts at noon and goes till 6 p.m. That's day 2. What I've done now is I have changed and manipulated time. I now get 21 days a week. Stack that up over a month, I'm gonna kick your butt. Stack it up over a year, you're toast. Stack it up over 5 years, my entire life is different than it would have been otherwise. And if you do this for about 90 of your traditional days that you think are, you will come back to me and go, that profoundly impacted my life.
All right, so there's a lot to unpack here. I want to first off, for those who are listening to this later, you have to imagine Ed Mylett is like Mickey Rourke esque steroid facelift. Like he's sort of pushing. He looks like a human blood vessel, like that's about to explode. And so he's very
I also like
intense.
that he thinks that people were living in caves like 300 years.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Yeah, like the caves 300 years ago. Maybe they were hiding in a bomb shelter somewhere. But yeah, the general idea is that there's, I guess I've done that. I've looked this up. I guess there's 3 days, quote unquote, 3 6-hour days in a day, your traditional days. And you need to like maximize that 6 hours. Obviously it's semantics. Obviously he's just doing an ontological trick. He's not actually warping, what did he say? Manipulating time with his hands. But it's part of a bit broader idea, which is like, you need to basically work yourself to death. Now, of course, if you actually follow these people, like how they market themselves, that they don't, like you said, they don't actually do any work really. That's what's so funny about this.
What is he doing during his 6-hour workday?
Yeah, so it's unclear, but comment if you could on how you can get 3 days work in 1 day by simply redefining a 6-hour period as a day.
I should note,
part
it's
of
not just
Sumerian.
3 days work; it's 3 days work in life and rest.
Yeah, and by the way, the fourth 6-hour period I think is when you sleep. So go ahead, just to be fair to Ed Mylett, I want to because they weren't adding up. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, I fully support like any rejection of linear time. So critical support because linear time is bourgeois. No, I mean, like, it reminds me. So obviously, like, it was a very funny video. I laugh whenever I see it. And it's just and I think I laugh for all the reasons where it's just kind of like, obviously it's just sort of insane. But the hands thing I think is just incredibly, just adds so much to it. It's a very like, what's it be for sort of Marvel Doctor Strange type of thing. But it reminds me a lot of this video that actually like really had a profound impact on me in a really bad way a few years ago. And also one of the things that actually made me quite interested in the sort of rise and grind stuff, because before I was like covering, or before I was looking at it as a journalist, like it was, as I mentioned, like, you know, in my mid-20s, I was sort of having a bit of a life crisis. And at the time I was also working on my book, and I had like 2 jobs at the same time to like, you know, try and support all that. So I was very sort of like short on time and it just sort of felt like I just didn't have enough hours in the day. And I remember watching this Casey Neistat video. Casey Neistat being sort of one of the sort of OG YouTubers who I haven't really checked in on for a while, but I was like, I liked the Casey Neistat stuff like a long time ago. And he did this video. I think Jocko Willing actually showed up in that video at some point or something similar, but he talked about how like he was like he sort of like arranged his day. And he did that thing where he sort of woke up very early and also went to bed quite late, and he sort of had 5 hours of sleep. And like that, like I don't know what the video is called, but you can probably find it quite easily on YouTube. And I remember watching that and being like, wow, like actually that's a really sustainable and healthy way to live. And so clearly I should just copy that, not really thinking that, okay, well, this guy not only lives a very different life to me, but also has way more money than I do. And like, you know, if something happens to his heart, like he's going to be fine, but I'm fucking not going to be fine. You know, I'm not like, if I just like live off like energy drinks, like it's going to kill me and it's not going to kill him. But it sort of came out of this sort of sense of desperation. And like, I don't know. I feel like one of the other interesting elements of this is just also the fact that as Rise and Grind content has developed over time, they haven't really got any new ideas. They're just sort of repackaging stuff that sort of already existed. And so the fact that like this is not really that different to like that Casey Neistat video from years ago sort of suggests a lot about like the limitations of this type of stuff. And it could also explain one of the reasons why some of these people are kind of having to engage with politics now, because one of the things that they sort of have to realize is that like, well, okay, well, even if I can manipulate time with my hands, I can't really manipulate the material world around me. And there are still things that will be frustrating. And therefore, like, I must engage with politics in some capacity. And the sort of going towards right-wing politics as much like seems to be a way in which like they can sort of maintain the idea that they are sort of extraordinary individuals that are sort of being held back by mysterious like dark forces, albeit like be it like woke students or like immigrants or something along those lines, right? That seems to sort of be like my observations around this.
Because it's not a huge leap from some of these mentalities, which again I think like a lot of fascist adjacent self-help, there's always, whether it's Jordan Peterson or Ed Mylett, there's always a sort of element of practical advice, like we talked about when we've talked about self-help before, where it's like, treat your wife with respect, or be nice, like, or brush your teeth, work out. Like, these are all sort of reasonable advices.
Yeah.
And then they start building on that a bunch of kind of
Yeah.
ideological claptrap in some ways, as you know, to kind of differentiate themselves in a market that is ultimately, again, a settled market. There's not really any new things under the sun. There's only so many ways you can skin the self-help cat. And every self-help book pretty much regurgitates the same general principles with bullshit added on top to kind of make them, to give them an angle, to give them a shtick.
Well, yeah, and I think there's like a few things going on there. Part of it is just like the fact that you can run out of stuff to say really quickly. There's only like a certain amount of times where you can just be like, yeah, like drink salt water in the mornings and go for like, a run and stuff like. And then because this is why now you just have like all the weird stuff. So like the Andrew Huberman type of like just kind of weird, the sort of obsessions with cold plunges, the sort of new obsessions with like different kinds of nootropics. The thing that's like advertised to me a lot on Instagram are like different forms of sort of like companies like trying to get your biometric data on the basis that like, oh, we just want to like optimize your diets and like, and so we're not going to give you like diet plans, but instead we're going to tell you your exact nutrient breakdown, so like how many sort of like oranges to eat in a day or something like that, right? Like they become like weirder and weirder. But I think at the same time, like the sort of online ecosystem around the self-help stuff has really changed, because in the same way that like a lot of these kind of self-help guys are sort of also these sort of like rise and grind, but also the self-help guys sort of veer towards right-wing politics. I think for like right-wing sort of influence and stuff have sort of realized that they can also sort of manipulate that space or sort of like get entrenched into it. So like, I don't know what you guys came across, but in the UK, there are like a lot of, show like YouTubers and shows that kind of fluctuate between like what is overtly right-wing politics, and then they'll sort of go towards, they'll interview like a self-help guy, or they'll interview like, David Goggins or something. And then they can just frame themselves as being like, oh, we're an ideas podcast. We just want to like teach you how to live a better life. Right. But it's also kind of like, well, no, you're a politics show that kind of uses these types of people to like run cover of like whatever you're trying to do. And so, yeah.
It's not a huge leap from like the haters are like the woman who turned you down, right?
Right.
Like, or your ex-wife, or like obviously the misogyny informs a lot of this, where it's like, I don't want to sort of Ed Mylett less so, but I think more the sort of Goggins fitness guys, especially. I think it's
and there's like and there's like other influencers who like I don't want to name just because like I don't want their freaks like harassing me in the DMs. Like I did like it happened once and it was really exhausting. But
those people.
Yeah, but people like know who they are. But it's like if you point out that like, no, you are a politics show, or like you are getting people in to make political points, and like just because you like every couple of weeks you get like a fitness guy on to like talk about what types of like new nootropics they're trying or whatever, or like what types of energy drinks they're having, like doesn't mean that you aren't kind of engaging with that. But I think like the confluence of that sort of means that I think in the same like right-wing kind of influencers in particular have kind of realized that this is actually like a very efficient avenue to sort of spread their ideas and also make them palatable to like a younger and more so like a lot of the political people that come on these sort of self-improvement shows and everything, they won't sort of go in and sort of like talk about like their sort of desires for political change or like political revolution of any kind. As you mentioned, like, they will sort of like frame the individual as being sort of held back by, what they kind of think is sort of like a left-wing system, even if objectively that is just not the case, right? Or like a system that is like being held back by like feminism and, wokeness or whatever. And I think like in terms of sort of the engagement of politics, it does sort of seem like what seems to be happening is the right-wing ecosystem has sort of moved towards that space. Whether that was inevitable or not, I'm not entirely sure, but it does open up a question sometimes like that people ask, and I'm not sure whether you guys have any thoughts on this, about whether like there is space for like leftists or like left-wing kind of influences. I don't like using that term, but just for the sake of it, whether they should kind of have like be engaging with these kind of self-help guys almost as a way of like preventing like self-help and like right-wing politics to kind of like be more intertwined than it already is.
We did an episode, I want to say 4 years ago, kind of, I mean, maybe it was 3 years ago, about whether it was self-help, and we discussed with our guest, can you have a kind of left-wing
if you count
self-help?
each day as 6 hours, Adam, I think it was like 123 years ago.
Sorry, you're right. So in my let years, And I think it's a great question. It's kind of the obvious logical follow-up question, which is like, okay, you're dunking on all this dumb shit, but like, what would be an alternative? Because clearly, you know, like we talked about, there's a market there. There's a loneliness. I think it's fair to say it skews male. I think that's probably accurate. There's an alienation from community. There's people, again, who are driven more from, you need to go move to a place for economic reasons versus family and friends, and people are divorced from their cultures and things of that nature. And yeah, and people have tried to sort of approximate some of those social systems via things like unions or things like sort of political actions. Whether or not you can get a kind of more overtly self-help, you know, that's a good question. I'd be sort of curious to hear what people think in the comments. Or is the idea of self-improvement kind of inherently fascist? You know, I don't think it is, but I think it's such a like leap, you know what I mean? Because there's nothing inherently fascist about self-improvement, right? That's obviously absurd, but you know, going from like on a very basic level of like what motivates people, what one can see how making one sort of Ubermensch or the protagonist of this grand narrative of haters can kind of lend itself to that. So that is a good question. Forgive me for not having a sufficient answer, but.
Well, I think it's more just like, it was a question that like, since someone asked me like years ago, and I didn't have an answer for that. Like, in any case, it was just like something that sort of comes up. I think one of the other parts of that was actually quite interesting, as you mentioned about like being divorced from your communities, is kind of like what replaces that. And like one thing that probably isn't worth is worth really thinking about is like how online cultures and online systems kind of like have not, like, it's not to say that they've replaced like material cultures, but it's more like these are kind of, for a lot of people, that's sort of what they have left. And so where you sort of have like a lot of the self-help content sort of existing in an online, like a purely online ecosystem, and the ways that people relate to that are kind of like through these forms of digital mediation. It seems like, you know, it seems like the sort of like pathway from, you know, it's not to say that it's like a direct pipeline, but the idea that, you know, when you sort of watch a self-help video from like a David Goggins video, you're not that far removed from like the worst right-wing shit that you've like ever heard in your life. The fact that like there aren't that many degrees of not self-improvement, degrees of separation does sort of suggest something about like the fact that when we sort of talk about these things, the content element of it is like one interesting aspect of it, but the other interesting aspect of it is the medium of which it is being distributed. And if like the sort of antidote to that, for lack of a better term, is to sort of like revitalize communities, or to sort of like at least sort of remind people of the importance of their sort of like material obligations, then it is something like, that is something sort of worth thinking about in terms of like how to combat that in like a more direct way.
I mean, I think it's really important to note this idea of you know, the medium continues to kind of atomize, right, and you know, silo, while also kind of creating this, you know, formed and found community. So it kind of does this, you know, it breaks apart, but it also pulls together. I mean, in almost like a very like a cultish kind of way, right? You have like your very motivational leader kind of leading the way, and you know you have a community, but you maybe don't know them in real life, you know, but you don't need to, because really everything is on you, right? So like you just need that kind of that video or that voice in your earbuds as you're, you know, running in the rain at, you know, 4:45 in the morning, after going to sleep at, you know, 3:45 in the morning. Like all that kind of fits together to create these new communities that kind of form online, but have very real life implications.
Well, and then the question is, sorry, go ahead.
The only other point I wanted to make with that, and only because like it's a good follow-up to what you were saying, is that like the sort of one of the kind of key differences, or one of the key things to sort of bear in mind about the online kind of community, is not as like sort of a replacement, but as something else, is that these are also sort of like interactions of which, you know, the people who are making these videos, your David Goggins, your Jordan Petersons or anything, like they don't owe you anything, right? And they're very clear, like sometimes they say it very directly in the terms of like, yeah, well, if you're not paying like to join my course, I don't owe you anything. And by the way, even if you do join my course, I owe you shit. Like that really sort of said, like, you know, it is something where it's like you look at that, it's like, yeah, this doesn't end well for anyone. But if that's kind of like all you've got, especially if you do feel lonely and alienated, well, like, you know, for lots of people, like they'll take it, right? And I think that's like a really dangerous, it's a really dangerous sort of situation where like the default, if you are sort of like feeling undervalued or underappreciated, or you're just not feeling sort of motivated to like live the life that you deserve for like lots of different reasons. Yeah, I think like maybe there are better ways of like, or there should be like better ways of communicating with people, and just like, you know, otherwise you're just sort of left with this shit, really.
So the real question is, how does socialism get people shredded? I think that's the big political question of our time. Because I remember when in Lebanon there was all these sort of gyms popped up out of nowhere, and they were widely understood to be kind of either Saudi or Emirati funded recruitment vehicles for ISIS. That like they would actually sort of actively recruit ISIS members in gyms, which kind of tracks, right? Like sort of alienated early mid-20s. The idea of using fitness as a kind of as a gateway drug to like some more sinister politics is not original, but of course it's also not inherently right wing, right? Not necessarily. So I guess the first like left wing rise and grind fitness guy will be its own niche.
I think,
although again, left wing politics is so inherently neurotic. I don't even know what that would look like.
I mean, I was gonna say it's an important, like, this is like, there's a serious element to it too, which is also like the ways in which like fitness is sold and like commodified and commercialized. And it's not to say that it wasn't always that, but it does sort of feel like it is something. It does sort of feel like that element has sort of accelerated as well. And there is also precarity when it comes to, I think, like before we were recording, I had sort of mentioned something about like a personal trainer that I had whose personality sort of changed in a matter of months after he went sort of down like this weird online like rabbit hole. But so much of that like also just had to do with the fact that like his job as a personal trainer, being employed by a gym and stuff, like over the course of the COVID lockdowns, so many personal trainers sort of like found themselves in these very precarious work environments where the only way they could really make ends meet was to sort of become like de facto influencers as well.
Right.
And like it, and like some of them like did really well out of it, but a lot of them sort of like actually didn't really do very well out of it, and they had to sort of pivot to other things. But at the same time, like I think it is an interesting insight into sort of like the accessibility of fitness, like whether it's sort of like the kind of closures of community gyms or the fact that gym memberships are not cheap by any means.
Right.
The fact that like there aren't the sort of like public spaces, parks. I don't know about like you guys in the States, but I do know that in London, for example, like the amount of public parks that like people can actually run in or like people can exercise in, like it's not really that much, right? And like depending on where you are, like they are not particularly accessible places. And so like if you actually do want to go into those, because like I think the gym, like by and large, is like one of those few spaces where there is sort of like a communal element to that, right? Like in a in a sort of secular manner, like these are sort of one of the few places of like communal engagement and socializing and so on. And the fact that like the like barrier to sort of
libraries and gyms.
You're right. But even then, like in the UK, again, like there are not really very many libraries, right? And so like, the gyms for the most part, especially if you're like a young sort of like working class person, like that might just sort of be all you have. I guess the point that I'm trying to get to is that like as these places become more scarce, the sort of barrier to sort of access them becomes a lot higher, and it becomes like a much more elite product, like actually sort of creating these safe environments in which like people can like even just form communities, not like, don't forget about like any sort of broader political project, even just sort of like forming their own, like that becomes way harder to do, right?
Well, I think as we start to wrap this, that's a lot of really, really good points. I think we need to figure out how to do, shredded socialism. We got to figure it out. But before we kind of start to wrap this up, and Hossein, you've been so generous with your time. I think it's like 18 in the morning right now there. So I'm going to announce our final citation swag winner for the evening. And that is John Donahoe. Congratulations. Thank you to you, John. Look out in your email and your Patreon messages for a note from Citations Needed, so we can get the info we need to send you your awesome gear. But also thanks to everyone who's tuned in and signed up, everyone who has supported us in the past, who continues to support us through Patreon. Again, we're 100% listener funded. We have no corporate sponsors. We don't ever run commercials. We don't try and sell mattresses or snack packs. We do that on purpose, and it's so that we can talk about what we want in the way we want. That is our own grindset mindset. But I think that will start to wrap us up, maybe even more than start. And I just really want to thank our guest today, Hossein Kesvani, who has been, with us. It's been so amazing to talk to you. Journalist, author, editor, co-host of the popular podcasts Trash Future and 10,000 Posts, a media producer in your own right, also a diligent student, I'm sure, in the digital anthropology department at University College London. Hossein, thank you so much again for staying up late with us today on Citations Needed.
No, thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for staying up late. We're very grateful. But please go to sleep, get your rest, wake up.
My eyes are drooping. Yeah, because I've got to.
You got to get up really soon.
You got to do Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, I've got like 10 miles to run in like an hour and a half. So
should be easy.
Well, Adam, is there anything else you would like to add before we close out?
No, I think that's a perfect
latest citation. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, that will do it. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us, for tuning into the live stream, for listening to this show when it comes out in its audio only format, as we always do. So thank you to everyone who continues to support the show. We really cannot thank you enough. We are so grateful for your support. Of course, in the meantime, you can follow the show on Twitter at Citations, on Facebook, Citations Needed. As we have been saying all night, become a supporter of the show if you're not already through patreon.com/Citations Needed podcast. All your support through Patreon is incredibly appreciated. And if you are just jonesing for that citation swag, head over to bonfire.com, search for Citations Needed, and you'll see our merch store there. All of your support is incredibly needed and also appreciated. Everything you buy, if you buy merch, that helps us out too. So enough of the salesman bullshit. Thank you all for listening. That will do it. I am Nima Shirazi.
I'm Adam Johnson.
Citations Needed senior producer is Florence Burrow Adams. Our producer is Julianne Tweeten. Production assistant is Trendell Lightburn. The newsletter is by Marco Cardolano. Transcriptions are by Maknor Imran. The music is by Granddaddy. Thanks again for listening, everyone. We'll catch you next time.